What is the best way to play through Ash with the best deck in the game? Let's go through this Holocaust level scenario. You have Branded Fusion in some capacity in your hand, whether through a Luber or another way to get to it. Your heart palpitations are going through the roof as 3 drops of sweat race down your forehead. Your opponent thinks that he'll sleep safely tonight, but he doesn't understand that in your hand, you have the ability to Exodia all over his face and put him back into the Stone Age. Except something seems off. Your opponent has that dweeby smile on their face that is about 11.7% more annoying than usual, as if they have an everything-proof shield. You attempt to silence that intrusive voice in your head that says, "You should have searched Branded in red." You decide to go for it, to enter into cosmic, orgasmic eternity and place the greatest work of art since the brothers Karamazov onto the field. Your opponent pushes back his glasses slightly with his pointer finger 4 millimeters higher than they were before you activated the card. You hear the dreaded, followed by the 4 most disgusting and derogatory words in the English language. Words that should be banned by the Geneva Convention. "I'm gonna ash that." Wow, so skilled, bro. You look through your hand, but there's no Called by the Grave. Your mind embraces oblivion as you ultimately reconsider ever playing this trash game again. Your opponent looks at you with content bliss, knowing that they completely outplayed you. They were better. They had the skill, the ability to draw the answer. Your dreams of Mere Jade Banish are now a long, distant hope. What was all of this for? The pain of this circumstance is all too real for many a branded player out there. Where did the ash touch you? But with scars comes resilience. With pain comes perseverance. Suffering builds character, and you decide to never allow this moment to happen again. How do we do this? That's the question. And there's only one answer: training montage. We're not going to talk about Called by the Grave, because it's just a staple in branded that would be ran at whatever legal amount you can run it, you run it. The card is too good. Unfortunately, it isn't at 3 or at higher numbers than 1, so it's not a legit consistent answer since you'll only see it about 11% of the time. So let's go through all of the solid options and find the best one to play through this Spawn of Satan. First one, Branded in High Spirits. I saw this one from a POC video recently and this stood out to me as an in-engine way to consistently play through Ash. What are the pros with this option? Well, you have, like I said, an in-engine way to somewhat play through Ash. The card itself is pretty broken. It reads like a custom card. I mean, have you read it? This card allows hands to become a lot more flexible, where you draw better than average. A Luber plus Branded Fusion or High Spirits or Albion or pretty much any other branded card in your deck becomes just straight cracked. The card recurs itself in the end phase, so on your next turn, it recurs itself on your opponent's turn. On your next turn, it gets back to you, and then you can go off with it again. It is a quick play and lets you load up on Graveyard and search your entire archetype. I mean, what are we talking about? With that being said, let's look into the cons. The card itself requires a high dragon count because the dragons from the extra deck are the most valuable sends. You can send a spellcaster in Yugioh, but it just isn't good enough. You want to be able to resolve this effect consistently and to its maximum available utility, and without a dragon, you're just kind of up Ish Creek. It's still usable, but loses so much of that aforementioned utility. It's technically an immediate -1, and it causes you to play hard in the nib. Also, the board that you pivot to is only okay to solid power level, depending on the rest of your hand, as opposed to some of the other options on here where you can just ignore the ash by negating it or getting another card that basically allows you to Branded Fusion again. As a final verdict on this card, I give it an 8 out of 10 as an option. Most of this score comes from the fact that it's searchable, and as we know, accessibility is king. Isn't that right, Duality? This card has been an answer for Ash for a long time now. It always could be used to play through it by using the kit, sprint play, using Brandon and High Spirits to still be able to Mirror Jade on your opponent's turn. The caveat here is it used up your Branded in red if you only ran 1. But it really was unlocked post SIAC when it became a 1-card puppet lock. It has an insane ceiling, is pseudo engine because it searches albaz. It can search a Dogmatica guy, it can send you guys from the extra deck to basically be able to play through Bystials and whatnot, also on top of Ash. And it also can be a starter and an extender, but it is not searchable, so sometimes when you'd like to access it, you won't see it. And sometimes you'll have too many of them, which leads us into the cons. Like I said, not searchable, which isn't ideal. Sometimes the redundancy of having multiples is bad. Also, sometimes you don't need to send because you've already resolved your engine. If your opponent doesn't have the Ash, then, the Nadir doesn't really do much. It just gives you another additional send where maybe you could save your Mirror Jade or whatnot on your turn. But if you don't need it, the hands that don't need this card, you just have a card in your hand that basically domain locks you for until the end of the turn. And in those instances, it feels like not only bad, it feels counterintuitive to your whole strategy. It also requires you to run a pretty big brick in Maximus, where if you draw Maximus and it, unless you draw a discard option, you really can't resolve this, and then you are screwed. Branded Opening and other cards can mitigate this, but you really need drawing the engine's brick here really hurts. It also requires you to run certain extra deck targets for it to be optimal. And some of these extra deck targets are not what you would want to run in a standard branded extra deck, which is already pretty tight. Branded extra deck tightness can be comparable to like Sky Striker. I'll give this card a 7 out of 10. It's an amazing card that can just outright win you the game sometimes, but sometimes can outright lose you the game. Crossout has been out for a minute, and from the get-go, people use it to play through Ash in this deck. The card is a quick play, which is awesome. Has amazing utility, which allows you to kick ass in a mirror match by negating Branded Fusion, by negating any main deck card, essentially. It can let you stop almost any hand trap that you decide to run in your deck. So not only can it stop the Ash, it can stop the Imperm, it can stop the Nib. I've used it to stop so many different cards. It's really has a wide berth of cards that you can stop. The cons, from the negative side, we have a card that feels horrible going second into a board, unless the board has absolutely no negates. Especially if you have multiples, you draw 2 crossouts, you will lose the game going second. I can't tell you how many times I've had hands with 2 crossouts and the 1 Ash. I know the percentages are unbelievably obscenely low, but it happens. You know it happens, we all know. It also requires you to run that Ash or that Imperm or whatever in your deck, which Branded struggles to make room for. 3 Called by the Grave would be much easier to facilitate in this deck, but 3 crossout, then 1 Ash, maybe 1 Imperm, 1 Nib, whatever, that's a lot to compensate for. And when you run these cards, you water down your consistency of your deck, because Branded does have a massive engine, which really exacerbates this issue. Ultimately, I give this card a 6 out of 10, because when it goes off, going first, you have the counter, and you didn't brick in the 1 Ash in your deck, and it's Tuesday the 13th at 3 p.m., then this card is awesome. 20 out of 10. But in the other instances, where you're going second, or you drop multiples, or it just ends up being a dead card in your hand, and it feels like it loses you more games than it wins sometimes. It's an objectively worse Called by the Grave. In this deck, in some decks, Crossout is better than Called by. In this deck, it's a horrible version of Called by. The pros of Thrust are numerous. It allows you to resolve Branded Fusion anyway by using Fusion Duplication, which can't be ashed by a second copy, which is nice. The only card that can interact with it is Bell, which not a lot of people run. It also can search half your deck, such as the aforementioned Branded Fusion deployment. It can also add any board breakers that you might have sided in, or other side cards to your hand. It's great going first, going second, and it only requires 4 slots technically, and then probably some side deck slots. The cons are minimal. If you draw multiples, it's not fun, so that's one of the drawbacks. If you draw it and your opponent has no Ash or another hand trap monster effect, then you just have a dead card in your hand. But ultimately, that doesn't matter, because if your opponent has no Ash and you have Branded Fusion, that means you're playing and probably winning that game. Overall, I give this card a 9.5 out of 10. The card was designed for Branded, essentially. It feels like, at least. And is just unbelievable. Low-key broken, and possibly could be on some form of ban list in the future when they decide to check the power level of this game a little bit. There's a reason that with a reprint, the card is still $50 for each copy. Ultimately, out of all of these 4 options, I would go with Thrust, followed very closely by Branded and High Spirits, and ideally I would run both, because the Branded and High Spirits is engine, so you can easily facilitate it, and so pretty much with those 2 cards you can play through it every time. Nadir and Crossout currently are not very good. They have had their time to shine in the past, and you can, in a 60 card build, possibly facilitate almost all of these, and then you're just playing through Ash every time, but then you are watering down your consistency a little bit, and there's hands that you'll draw with like Crossout, Branded High Spirits, Thrust, and then no way to play, and you just lose. But that's a story for another time. For all of you that have stayed this long, I want to say I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. We're almost at 1,000 subs. I hope that you all like what you see. And if you do, please consider getting us to 1,000 subs and over that by subscribing if you haven't already. Also, like this video, share it with friends, family, loved ones, church pastors, whoever. Otherwise, join our Discord and watch this video to continue your rabbit hole journey on the YouTubes. As always, see ya!